About a year and a half ago, I had the distinct pleasure of traveling with our bishop to Los Angeles to visit Homeboy Industries. Does anybody out there know what that? Have you heard of that? It was started in the late 80s by a Catholic priest named Father Greg Boyle, who wanted to give former gang members job training so that they could leave the gang life behind. He has a motto that says, "Nothing stops a bullet faster than a job." So he's been working for more than 40 years helping to get gang members off of the streets and helping them heal and overcome trauma and violence in their lives and drug addiction and move into new life. And he has a great book, he has several books out. First one was called Tattoos on the Heart. And in that book, he tells the story of a former gang member. He always calls them homies, hence Homeboy Industries. One kid who, his name is Anthony, and they were in the car driving around, and Father Greg needed gas. So he said to Anthony, keep an eye out for a gas station. And Anthony leans over and looks at the gas gauge, and he says, "No, dog, you're good." And yeah, that's how the story goes. "Yo, dog, you're good." And he said, "What? I'm on E. E means empty." And he goes, "That's not what E means." He goes, "What do you think E means?" He said, "Enough." He said, No. He goes, "Well, what do you think the F means?" And Anthony said, "Finished," right? He had him backwards. But sometimes in life, that's kind of what we do. We go through life thinking that all of the abundance and everything that we have, we are full of, but we actually think we're empty. And sometimes when we are spiritually empty, and we're empty of mercy and compassion, we go around treating people like we're full. In John's gospel, when Jesus is on the cross on Good Friday, some of his last words are, "It is finished." It is finished. Mary Magdalene is at the foot of the cross, and when she hears Jesus say that, she believes him. Because everything in her life that had been going well dropped out and was empty and was finished. Mary Magdalene had probably been with Jesus from the beginning, had spent several years with him along with the other disciples, following around and learning from him and being part of that community. And when she experienced the crucifixion, it was the worst thing that she could imagine. And it became her whole reality. And so often when we're experiencing a crisis in our lives, it becomes our whole reality. It can even become our identity. Father Greg Boyle also says, so often gang members have done horrible things. They have sold drugs, they have killed people, they have gone to jail and come out. And all they know is the story that tells them that they are the worst thing that they did on their worst day. And a lot of us believe that too, about ourselves. That the worst experience we have is the reality that we live into. That our worst day is all there is. When Mary Magdalene heard Jesus say on the cross, "It is finished," it was her worst day, and it was going to define who she was now. It was going to define all of the disciples. In every gospel story, Mary Magdalene is there at the resurrection. All four gospels agree to this. Sometimes she's by herself, like in the gospel from John, and sometimes she's with Jesus' mother Mary, and sometimes she brings other friends with her, but she's there every time. And I think that she's the disciple that shows up because she's the only disciple that Jesus healed. All of the other disciples called by Jesus, but only Mary Magdalene was healed by Jesus. The Gospel of Luke says Mary had 7 demons inside of her, and Jesus healed her from those demons. Mary Magdalene had spent decades of her life dealing with whatever those demons were, whatever they said to her, whatever reality that they were lying about, that was her reality. She lived every day as if it was her worst day, and then Jesus came along and healed her from that, gave her new life from the death that she had been living. And so often, that's what life is like for us too. We think we're the worst thing that's happened to us. You lose a job, and you become that worst thing. Your marriage falls apart, and that's the only reality you can see. A loved one is given a cancer diagnosis, or your best friend dies. That becomes your reality. And that's the place that Mary Magdalene was in. She had gone from worst to healing in life, back to the worst again. And she couldn't see another way around it, that death, to everything she wanted, everything she hoped for. And so on that Easter morning, that first Easter morning, she goes to the tomb bringing spices to care for the wounded body of her friend, her teacher, the person who loved her and gave her community and purpose and meaning and belonging. Mary, who knew her own wounds, which had been touched by Jesus, only wanted to take care of Jesus the same way that he had cared for her and her wounds. And so she goes on that first Easter morning there. Another story that Greg Boyle tells at Homeboy Industries, one of the things that they do there, their main thing, their first thing, these gang members come in with a huge amount of trauma, childhood trauma, horrible actions that they've done. They come with addiction. And the first 18 months of the program, when they sign on, is actually about self-healing. So they get paid to go to therapy, or to earn their GED, or to live without drugs. They get paid for that because Greg Boyle knows that you can't move into new life if you're holding on to your wounds. And he shares this story about a young man who had come out of jail, joined Homeboys, was in 8 or 9 months of his first program, learning about his wounds and his trauma and how they affect him, how they've hurt his life and brought death to his life. And Boyle invites him to speak to a group of 600 social workers. This kid from the streets of LA who had been in jail, to speak to all these people with master's degrees and PhDs. And his name was Jose. He was sharing his story. And he said when he was a child, his mother used to beat him so severely that he would need to wear 3 T-shirts to school every day. And he would get made fun of for that. It's LA, it's hot. Why are you wearing 3 shirts? And it was so the first one would soak up the blood from his wounds. And the second one would have blood on it too. And the third one, that was the one for the public to see. Obviously, his mother had her own trauma to deal with, and she wasn't dealing with it well. One day when he was about 9 or 10, she drove him south across the border in Mexico and dropped him off, abandoned him. And it took his grandmother 90 days to get the location out of her daughter so that she could go and bring Jose home. This was the trauma. This was the death that Jose was living into, his worst thing that was his reality. When he joined Homeboy Industries, he learned how to process through these wounds and these traumas to try and make better decisions for himself. And he said to this crowd of social workers, he said, "I wore 3 T-shirts well into my adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them, but now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends." He says, "How can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds?" That's why Mary Magdalene showed up on that first Easter morning. She knew her wounds, and she knew the one who had healed them and brought her life. And so she shows up on that day, that worst day, and sees the risen Christ, who in his body, his resurrected body, still bore the scars of his recent torture and death, his own wounds, which would bring us healing and salvation. And so Mary Magdalene then experiences that her worst day isn't her worst day. She moves through that and finds new life. And what does she do with that? But bring it back to her brothers, her fellow disciples, to share with them that new life, that resurrection life. That's the thing about resurrection. It's not just something that occurred once 2,000 years ago to one individual. In his own resurrection, Jesus brings us daily resurrection. Yes, we have this hope that when we die, we'll be resurrected in our bodies at some point in time, but our life isn't meant to just be focused on making it into some eternal reward for some someday resurrection that's in God's time. Mary, when she experiences resurrection, just doesn't say, "Well, that's nice," and sit down and think about that. Wait for her own death to join Jesus. She brings that life and that love and that experience and that connection to people who are themselves experiencing their own woundedness and brokenness and death. That's what Jesus wants for us, to take his resurrection, to take our hope in that and bring it to people like Jose, who are wounded, who need us to bring life and hope and healing into all of the broken places in this world. And that's one of the things here at St. John's that we've this year have begun doing by going to Chester East Side, and partnering with them to provide meals, evening meals, with folks who otherwise would have nothing to eat at night. And so we need you to help us in that resurrection life, to practice resurrection by being the ones who go and serve the meals and being the ones who help us pay for the meals that we're going to serve. Because that's what Jesus really wants for us. Not to just sit down in our sorrow and bemoan the way the world is, but to get up and experience life and bring that to others. So that when we're doing that, we're practicing the faith that will bring salvation to this world.